It is 2 in the morning. You have work in 5 hours. The episode you are watching ended 11 minutes ago, and yet somehow the next one is already playing, and you are still here, telling yourself the same lie you told yourself 2 episodes ago. Just this one, then I'll sleep. You will not sleep, and in the morning, exhausted and vaguely ashamed, you will conclude that you have a discipline problem, that you lack self-control, that something is wrong with you. This explanation is comforting in its simplicity and almost entirely wrong. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are a creature running ancient survival software in an environment that has been precision engineered to exploit it. Binge-watching is not a personal failing. It is a trap, and your ancestors built the lock. So, let us take this behavior apart at the level it actually operates, the level of neurology, of narrative psychology, and of the deep evolutionary drives that shaped how the human brain processes stories, curiosity, and reward, because the answer is not that television is addictive in some vague, hand-waving way. The answer is specific. It lives in the architecture of a brain that evolved to crave stories, to hunt for resolution, and to conserve energy whenever possible. What emerges is not a lecture about your bad habits. It is an explanation of why the most sophisticated entertainment industry in human history has learned to pick a lock that evolution installed in your skull hundreds of thousands of years ago. First, you have to understand something fundamental about the human brain. It is not primarily a logic machine. It is a story machine. For the overwhelming majority of human existence, before writing, before books, before any means of recording information outside the human skull, stories were the technology through which our species stored and transmitted everything that mattered: where the water was, which plants would kill you, what happened to the last group that wandered too far north in winter. Knowledge survived only if it could be remembered, and the human brain remembers stories far better than it remembers isolated facts. This is not a metaphor. It is a measurable property of human cognition. Present a person with a list of disconnected facts, and they will forget most of them within hours. Embed those same facts inside a narrative with characters, tension, cause and effect, and retention increases dramatically. The brain treats a story as a kind of simulation, activating the same neural regions it would use if you were actually experiencing the events. When you hear that a character reached for a rope, the motor regions associated with grasping activate. When you hear that a character was afraid, your own threat detection circuitry stirs. Psychologists call this narrative transportation, the sense of being carried into a story so completely that the outside world briefly recedes. From an evolutionary standpoint, this was an extraordinary advantage. A young hunter-gatherer who could sit around a fire and be transported into the story of an elder's near-fatal encounter with a predator learned that lesson almost as vividly as if he had lived it without the risk of dying. Storytelling let humans accumulate experience across generations. It was, in a real sense, the first virtual reality, and the brains that were most powerfully drawn to stories, most susceptible to that feeling of transportation, were the brains that learned the most and survived the best. We are the descendants of the people who could not look away from a good story. That susceptibility is not a flaw. It is our inheritance. But being drawn to stories is only half of the mechanism. The other half is curiosity, and curiosity, it turns out, is not a gentle intellectual preference. It is a biological drive with real neurological teeth. When the human brain encounters a gap in its knowledge, a question without an answer, a situation without a resolution, it generates a state of tension that feels genuinely uncomfortable, and it rewards the closing of that gap with a hit of pleasure. This is not an accident of temperament. It is a system, and it evolved for a reason. Consider the situation of an ancestral human. Information about the environment was survival. Where did that animal go? What made that sound in the dark? Why did the birds suddenly go silent? A brain that felt a compulsive itch to resolve these uncertainties, to fill the gap, to find out, was a brain attached to a body that was more likely to survive. Curiosity was calibrated to be slightly painful precisely so that it would motivate action. An organism perfectly content with not knowing is an organism that walks into danger it could have anticipated. Neuroscientists have mapped this drive with striking precision. The moment the brain anticipates that a knowledge gap is about to be closed, the dopamine system activates, not when the answer arrives, but in the anticipation of it. Dopamine, remember, is not really the chemistry of pleasure. It is the chemistry of wanting, of pursuit, of the gap between where you are and the reward you expect. Curiosity is dopamine applied to information. The brain treats an unanswered question the same way it treats a visible piece of food just out of reach, as something it must move toward. Now consider what this means for a story. A well-constructed narrative is essentially a machine for opening knowledge gaps and then, tantalizingly, delaying their closure. Who is the killer? Will they survive? What was in the letter? Every one of these questions activates the same ancient circuitry that once kept our ancestors alive by making them desperate to know. The storyteller who understands this holds a kind of power over the human nervous system, and the modern entertainment industry understands it better than anyone in history. This brings us to one of the most useful psychological findings for understanding why you cannot turn off the television: the Zeigarnik effect. In the 1920s, the Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik noticed something peculiar about waiters. They could hold complex, unpaid orders in perfect memory, who ordered what, across an entire busy section. But the moment the bill was paid and the transaction complete, the memory evaporated almost instantly. The completed task was released. The unfinished one clung. Zeigarnik took this observation into the laboratory and confirmed it. People remember interrupted or incomplete tasks far better than completed ones. An unresolved situation occupies the mind. It generates a low, persistent cognitive tension that does not release until the loop is closed. Your brain, in effect, refuses to fully let go of anything it has started but not finished. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. An ancestor who forgot about the half-built shelter, the partially processed carcass, the task abandoned halfway when night fell, was an ancestor at a disadvantage. The mind that kept unfinished business active, that maintained a nagging awareness of what still needed doing, was the mind more likely to return and complete the work that survival depended on. The discomfort of the unresolved was a feature. It pulled you back to finish. And now, understand what a cliffhanger actually is. A cliffhanger is the deliberate, engineered weaponization of the Zeigarnik effect. The episode ends at the precise moment a knowledge gap has been ripped open and left gaping. The character is in mortal danger. The betrayal has just been revealed. The question has been asked, but not answered. Your brain, following programming that is hundreds of thousands of years old, cannot comfortably hold that open loop. It generates tension. It demands closure. And the next episode, resolution to the very tension the previous episode created, is one automatic click away, already counting down from 10. The industry did not invent this vulnerability. It simply found the exposed wire and learned exactly where to touch it. It is worth pausing to appreciate just how deliberately this environment has been constructed, because binge-watching is not something that merely happens to be possible. It is something that has been actively designed to be as close to inevitable as a team of engineers and behavioral scientists can make it. Consider the countdown timer that appears the instant an episode ends. In earlier eras of television, finishing an episode meant a natural stopping point, a moment of decision in which the viewer had to actively choose to continue. That moment of decision was where self-control had a chance to intervene. The autoplay countdown surgically removes it. It inverts the default. Now, doing nothing means continuing to watch, and stopping requires an active choice, reaching for the remote, resisting the momentum, overriding the pull of the open loop the cliffhanger just created. The path of least resistance has been redirected to point directly at the next episode. This is a profound manipulation of something psychologists have studied for decades: the power of defaults. Humans overwhelmingly tend to accept whatever the default option is in almost every domain, from organ donation to retirement savings to what happens after a television episode ends. By making continuation the default and stopping the effortful exception, streaming platforms have arranged the environment so that the limbic system's natural preference, the path requiring the least energy, is also the path that keeps you watching. Your tendency to conserve effort, forged over millions of years of scarcity, has been turned into a mechanism for keeping you on the couch. Let us now bring the evolutionary mismatch into sharp focus, because this is where the whole picture snaps together. Every drive we have discussed, the hunger for story, the ache of curiosity, the grip of the unfinished loop, the pull toward the low-effort default, was calibrated for a world in which these instincts had natural limits and served genuine survival ends. In the ancestral environment, stories ended. The elder finished the tale, the fire burned down, and everyone went to sleep. Curiosity, once satisfied, released. You found out what made the sound, and the drive quieted. Unfinished tasks were finite. You completed the shelter, and the loop closed. These systems were never designed to run indefinitely because in the world that shaped them, the supply of stimulation was always limited by the realities of physical existence. There was no infinite story. There was no elder who could produce a perfectly engineered new cliffhanger the instant the previous one resolved. Forever, all night, for as long as you were willing to sit there. That is precisely what streaming provides. The modern entertainment environment supplies an effectively infinite stream of professionally engineered narrative tension, available on demand, with every natural stopping point systematically removed. Your curiosity drive, which evolved to be satisfied by finite answers, is fed a bottomless well of new questions. Every resolution is immediately followed by a fresh gap. The system that was supposed to reach satisfaction and quiet down is never allowed to arrive there. It is held permanently in the state of wanting. This is the same structural mismatch that underlies so much of modern dysfunction. A drive that was adaptive because the environment imposed natural limits becomes maladaptive the instant those limits are removed. Our appetite for calorie-dense food was adaptive when sugar and fat were rare. It became a problem when they became infinite and cheap. Our appetite for story and resolution was adaptive when stories were finite and told around a fire. It becomes a trap when an industry can manufacture unlimited cliffhangers and deliver them through a screen that never turns itself off. The instinct is not broken. The environment is simply unrecognizable to the instinct. Now let us be specific about the scale of the forces arranged against you, because it is easy to underestimate just how asymmetric this contest really is. When you sit down intending to watch one episode and rise 4 episodes later, you are sometimes tempted to frame it as a fair fight that you lost. Your willpower versus your weakness. It is not a fair fight. It was never designed to be. The streaming platform on the other side of that screen has access to viewing data from hundreds of millions of people. It knows, with statistical precision, exactly where in an episode attention tends to drift, exactly how long a countdown timer should be to maximize continuation, exactly which thumbnail and which title will pull you back in. Teams of engineers, designers, and behavioral scientists, some of the most talented people of their generation, are employed full-time with a single overriding objective: to maximize the amount of time you spend watching. That is the business. Attention is the product being sold, and every design decision is optimized to extract more of it. Against this, your conscious intention to get a good night's sleep is a faint and lonely thing. It is a single voice from the prefrontal cortex, that recently evolved, energy-expensive, easily fatigued planning system, attempting to override a set of ancient drives that are being deliberately amplified by one of the most sophisticated persuasion operations ever assembled. The cliffhanger exploits your curiosity circuitry. The autoplay exploits your default bias. The endless catalog exploits your novelty seeking. Each of these was a survival tool. Each has been reverse engineered and turned back on you. And the reason you lose at 2 in the morning is not that you are uniquely weak. It is that almost everyone loses because the system was built, tested, and refined specifically to make sure they do. Here is what all of this adds up to, and it genuinely reframes the whole experience. The shame you feel after a lost night in front of the screen is built on a false premise. It assumes that the outcome was a referendum on your character, that a stronger person would simply have stopped. But the behavior was not the product of weakness. It was the entirely predictable result of ancient, adaptive drives colliding with an environment engineered to exploit them. Your brain did exactly what hundreds of thousands of years of evolution shaped it to do: pursue the story, resolve the gap, follow the low-effort path. It simply did so inside a system designed to make those instincts run without limit. This does not mean you are helpless, and it does not mean the behavior has no cost. Recognizing the trap is not the same as escaping it, but understanding the mechanism changes the nature of the response. The solution was never going to be more shame, more self-directed contempt, more willpower summoned through gritted teeth at 2 in the morning, because willpower, as we have seen, is the tired and lonely part of the system, and it will lose that fight most nights. The effective response is to stop fighting on the enemy's terrain, turn off autoplay, and you restore the moment of decision the countdown was designed to remove. Set the environment against the instinct rather than trying to outmuscle the instinct directly. You cannot easily override the drive. You can, however, change the conditions under which it operates. Looking back across the whole arc, from the fire-lit story to the glowing screen, from the elder's cliffhanger to the autoplay countdown, what emerges is not a story of human weakness. It is a story of human drives, magnificent in their original context, being turned against the very people they were built to protect. The pull you feel toward just one more episode is the same pull that once kept your ancestors leaning in toward the fire, desperate to know how the story ended. That pull kept your lineage alive. It is not your enemy. It has simply been captured. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human hunger for story and resolution was one of our species' greatest survival tools. It let us learn without dying, remember what mattered, and lean in toward the knowledge that kept us alive through the dark. The exhaustion you feel after a night you did not intend is not the signature of a broken mind. It is the echo of a brilliant adaptation, operating exactly as designed, inside a world that learned to counterfeit the fire and never let the story end. Your ancestors could not look away from the tale. Neither, it turns out, can you.